I would like to talk to us about addressing a deeply serious concern, a very real problem facing the church today. When I say the church, I mean every space that seeks to uphold the values and the message of the gospel of Christ, from schools and children's church gatherings to seminaries, churches, and even non-profits and marketplace networks. As followers of Christ, we carry a sacred responsibility, that of safeguarding those in our care. This call is urgent and cannot be ignored or placed on the back burner. The time is now. We must learn to think and act biblically regarding the violations of safety and abuse in the church. And I want to specifically highlight in this series issues of sexual abuse in the Christian spaces. As sensitive as this topic may be, it demands that we as the church rise to defend the vulnerable and seek justice for countless victims in our spaces. Too often, when an incident of abuse is reported, the church reacts with shock, denial, or blame, especially when the accused holds influence. And sometimes, instead of supporting the victim, the structures and systems protect the accused and silence the victims. This must change. The church is called to be a place of truth, justice, and safety for everyone. And let me urge you into making Christian spaces safe by stressing on the fact that safeguarding is not just a legal requirement, it is a biblical mandate. A biblical foundation for safeguarding can be reflected on by looking at Psalm 23. This is a very familiar psalm for us. This psalm is deeply personal. It's a psalm of trust and assurance in the care of our Good Shepherd. The psalm paints a picture of safety and flourishing. The sheep feed, rest, and flourish without fear because they trust the shepherd completely. There are green pastures and still waters and a table prepared in the presence of enemies. But there is that constant reassuring presence of the shepherd to help them rest and eat and drink with confidence. The feeding trough, it overflows despite the obvious dangers of predatory animals around. Even when walking through the darkest valley, there is no fear because the shepherd is nearby. This psalm is not just poetry, it reflects our deepest need for safety and care. This is picture perfect of safety and well being. We feel safe because God, our shepherd, is attentive, present, and protective. This is God's design for all of us, a place where people feel secure, valued, and protected. Psalm 23 is not just about what God does for us, it is a model for how we should care for those under our leadership. If God, our shepherd, creates a space for our protection, care, and provision, then we, his followers, must reflect the same kind of care and safety to those in our care. Whether we are pastors, leaders, children's church workers, parents, mentors, we must ask ourselves, are those in our care safe? Do they trust us? Are our churches and Christian spaces truly places of refuge? And safeguarding begins with those of us who lead. Those who lead and provide care are responsible for the safety of those in our purview of care. You may say, well, I'm not a pastor. Well, you may not be holding an office as a pastor with a congregation to lead, but if you are a parent, a leader, or mentor in any capacity, or even a disciple of Christ, you are called to be a safe person who prioritizes the safeguarding of those in your care and your sphere of influence. In John 10:11, Jesus says, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep, and we are called to emulate our good shepherd. Safeguarding is a matter of us laying our lives down if need be. That is how much of a priority this aspect of care is. In Ezekiel chapter 34, we have a serious warning from God about not being shepherds who carry his heart. In verse 10, we read, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I am against the shepherds and will hold them accountable for my flock. And the passage concludes in verse 31 with these words to comfort those who are neglected. You are my sheep, the sheep of my pasture, and I am your God, declares the sovereign Lord. Here are a couple of questions to reflect on for safe pastors and leaders. What characteristics of a good shepherd, as described in Psalm 23, are essential for pastors and leaders to emulate in ensuring the safety of their congregations, organizations, and ministries? How can pastors and leaders build trust to create a safe space for everyone? What lessons about being a safe pastor can be gleaned from Ezekiel 34? Here are a few pointers on how we can apply God's heart in our spaces. Begin to explore what it means to be a safe person. Are there aspects of your behavior, speech, or virtual communication that may cause harm to anyone? Assess gaps in your church or workspace or organization that could compromise safety, especially for children and women. Instead of reacting in fear or judgment, seek the help of trusted nonprofits and mental health professionals to create a safe space for people in your community. If you're a victim of abuse, find a trusted person to talk to and get help. God wants all of us, His sheep, to flourish without fear. And He is looking to us to restore the sacred trust in our spaces. Here are a couple of questions I want to invite us to reflect on. What characteristics of a good shepherd, as described in Psalm 23, are essential for pastors and leaders to emulate in ensuring the safety of their congregations, organizations, and ministries? How can leaders and pastors build trust to create a safe space for everyone? What lessons about being a safe person and a safe pastor and a safe leader can be gleaned from Ezekiel 34? Here are a few pointers on how we can apply God's heart to our spaces. Begin to explore what it means to be a safe person. Are there aspects in our behavior, speech, or virtual communication that may cause harm to anyone? Assess gaps in your church, workspace, or organization that could compromise safety for anyone, especially women and children. Instead of reacting in fear or judgment, seek the help of trusted nonprofits and mental health professionals to create a safe space for those in your community. If you're a victim of abuse, find a trusted person to talk to and get help. God wants all of His sheep to flourish without fear. He is looking to us to restore the sacred trust in our spaces. In the last session, we talked about safe pastures and that building safe spaces begins with us being safe persons. Safe pastures need safe pastors. In this session, we will talk about a safe posture towards safeguarding. We have been using the word safeguarding and safe spaces so frequently. What do they really mean? At its core, safeguarding is about protecting a person's right to live in safety, free from abuse, harm, and exploitation. It's about ensuring that our churches, organizations, ministries, and communities are safe places where people can flourish without any threat or fear. If governments and workplaces worldwide are making safeguarding a priority, how much more should the church, a place meant to reflect the heart of Christ, be diligent about it? What is a safe space? A safe space is a place where safeguarding is taken seriously, a place where abuse is not ignored or covered up, a place where victims of abuse are protected and supported, a place where leaders and caregivers are trained to respond well to abuse victims. For the church, safeguarding cannot be an afterthought. It must become a part of our culture, policies, and leadership values. Many institutions treat safeguarding as a legal obligation, something to comply with to avoid trouble. But the church is called to do more than just comply. We are called to embrace a safe posture. What is a safe posture? A safe posture means we hold this responsibility to safeguard as a sacred mandate and taking action against abuse even if the law doesn't require it. A safe posture is about creating a culture, a pattern of response where victims are heard and not silenced. It is about fostering accountability even among leaders. A safe posture is our willingness to go beyond mere legal obligations. Let's consider this example. In India, the POCSO Act, the Protection of Children from Sexual Offences Act, only came into force in 2012. So, what should the church have done before 2012? Should we have ignored child abuse because there was no strong law against it? Should we have waited for legal reforms before acting on behalf of the vulnerable children? Absolutely not. Throughout church history, the gospel has always disrupted injustices, whether it was fighting against child marriage or slavery or other oppressive practices like sati. A safe posture means we don't wait for humanly orchestrated laws to tell us what is right. We take action because justice is part of our calling as Christ's disciples, and God's law is written in our hearts. If the church is to embrace a safe posture, we must focus on three aspects of safeguarding. Firstly, we have to prioritize prevention. Why is prevention better than cure? Because counselors and psychologists will tell you that abuse leaves very deep and lasting scars in its victims. It is certainly better to prevent abuse than deal with its consequences. A safe church or safe space doesn't just react to abuse, it actively creates a preventive environment to ensure protection for the vulnerable. And very often, women, children, the elderly, and socially oppressed communities are prone to be exploited. Prioritizing their safety should be an important part of building safe communities. Secondly, when abuse is reported, the first response should be to protect and care for the victim of abuse. But too often we find ourselves working towards protecting the perpetrators of abuse, especially if they are people of prominence, like a leader or a pastor or an organization head. A victim-centric approach will help us build and restore the sacred trust that many have lost in the church. A victim's needs should be placed above the institution's reputation. Remember that as good shepherds, we are called to lay down our lives for the sheep. Thirdly, we should be aware that abuse of a vulnerable person can happen anywhere in homes, schools, workplaces, and even in churches and children's learning centers like VBS and Sunday schools. A safe posture involves cultivating a culture of prevention where compliance with safeguarding is regarded as paramount. I want us to briefly look at the Sermon on the Mount section of Matthew 5, where Jesus lays out a framework for a safe posture. Jesus says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, the abused and the oppressed are seen and valued by God. The ones whose hearts are broken are automatically in line of God's attention. Blessed are those who mourn. Victims of oppression and injustices deserve comfort and healing, and they have God's attention. Blessed are the meek, those from whom everything is stripped off. God sees them and will fight for them." Further on in the chapter, there is a clear mandate given to us when we are called to hunger for righteousness. We seek justice for the vulnerable, and the blessed are the merciful. And when we offer care and not judgment, we are taking the place of Christ in the lives of those in front of us. And when we are makers of peace, or shalom creators, we are modeling what a safe space should look like. We champion the creation of safe spaces where everyone, irrespective of their status or vulnerability, can flourish. We are the salt and we are the light. To be like salt is to create an impact in society that welcomes everyone to flourish. In doing so, we prevent abuse and exploitation. Take a moment to reflect on what would it mean for your organization, for your church, to adopt a safe posture where safeguarding is more than just compliance or about keeping our obligation to the law. Where do we go from here? Here are a few suggestions if you have never thought of ways to implement a safe posture. Plan a safety awareness day in your church or organizations. Host a training session for leaders on safeguarding policies. Engage mental health professionals to support survivors of abuse. Set up anonymous reporting systems for abuse victims so that they are not under threat and they are not embarrassed to report if there is an abuse incident in their lives. A safe church or organization doesn't happen by accident. It happens when we intentionally work towards it. Jesus calls us to be the light in the darkness, not just be those who just preach about it, not just those who preach about justice, but those who live it out, who walk the talk. Let's become the church where everyone flourishes in the safety of Christ's love and the care of his shepherds who are seeking to restore this sacred trust.